Confident, confident, confident. I can be confident, 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 confident. I can be confident at work.
Hello and welcome to the Confident at Work podcast. I'm your host and your confidence coach, Anna Manning. And today we're talking about the shame shell. So you might remember from 2 episodes ago, the Oops, I Did It Again, the importance of accepting your weaknesses for building confidence episode. I talked about our tendency to get inside our little shame shell when something goes wrong. So when one of our weaknesses shows up and something goes wrong, we can want to hide. I imagine like a little crab crawling back inside its shell. Only this shell is actually the shame shell. This is a concept that I think I created. I can't imagine anybody else talking about a shame shell, but here we are. It's the place where we want to retreat to when our weaknesses show up. And I want to talk about it on this week's podcast episode because a few people raised it with me after I talked about this shame shell in an email. And I don't think that most of us know that we're doing it. And I also don't think that most of us know that it is an option whether or not we get into our little shame shell after we've done something wrong. So we're going to talk a little bit about the shame shell. What is it? What goes down inside the shame shell? Why you actually have a choice about whether you get in it or not. And we're going to think about some ways that you might like to stay out of it. Because I see it creating all kinds of havoc for my clients. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, there is a lot of shame shell hiding going on. And I used to do it too. I had a shame shell. My goodness me, did I have a shame shell? It was a very unpleasant place for me to be. I don't really spend any time there anymore, I don't think. Maybe on occasion. But it's not a usual place for me to be anymore. And thank God, because it was a horrible place for me to be. And maybe if you have a little shame shell, it's a horrible place for you to be too. So what is it? Well, when we experience, let's say, a setback, a mistake, something goes wrong, it's not the way we want, we can tend to kind of hide and retreat inside the shell. That response is, fairly normal and is rooted in guilt, in fear of judgment, and sometimes in shame. And when I say shame, I have a very particular way of thinking about it. Now, you can think about it however you want, but I'm just going to offer you the way I think about it and the way I've learned to think about it. I think partly from Brené Brown and also from a guy called David Bedrick. And I'm going to recommend that if the shame shell is something you're climbing into very often, you might want to check out David's work because I've done some unshaming work with him. And trust me, it was liberating. So shame, I think, is different than lots of other emotions. I think it's different than being embarrassed or being disappointed or, feeling a bit bad about the fact that I've messed up or I've done something wrong. Shame for me goes a step further than that and says, because you messed up, because you got something wrong, you are bad. You are wrong. It goes right to the heart of you. It doesn't say this thing was bad. It says because this thing happened, you are bad. In some way, it creates some kind of unworthiness or some idea of unworthiness inside us. And that creates this feeling of shame. Now, many of us have heard all emotions are good and it's good to feel all emotions. On the point of shame, I do not agree. I do not want any individual feeling that because something's gone wrong or they haven't done something right or because they struggle with this, therefore they are bad as an individual and they're going to feel shame because of that. If your brain's arguing with me here and it's like, well, no, it's good for me to feel shame. Is it? Do you want a child to feel shame when they get something wrong? Even if, even if they did something bad and they've messed up, you might say to them, it was really wrong that you did that. You messed up. Would you also go on to say, and because of that, you are wrong, you are bad, you are unworthy, you are unlovable? I don't think you would say that. I don't think I would say that. Maybe if I was having a really bad day. I don't know. I'm not a parent and I'm not judging you if you are. But I just feel like it's an added level that we definitely do not need. But it's an added level that many of us will experience. So let's say I've messed something up with a client. My natural reaction might be to crawl inside myself and be like, oh God, I want to protect myself from being exposed. I want to protect myself from being judged. I don't want to feel inadequate. I don't want to feel bad. I don't want to feel disappointed. Don't want to let people down. And what happens when you get inside that shame shell? What goes down inside the shame shell? Well, if you've ever been in it, I think you know what goes down in there. And I think you know that it's not good. So the idea is that being inside that shell, retreating, not being seen, is somehow protective. But actually, my experience, and maybe yours, about what happens inside that little shame shell, that's not protection. That's being mauled by a bear whilst you're in a cave that you can't even get out of. In fact, I think one of my clients actually gave me that metaphor, that they were like, it was like being mauled by a bear inside a cave that they couldn't get out of. And they wanted to convince me that it was a good idea, that they were protected when they went in the cave. And then they realized actually they were just being mauled by a bear. Perfect analogy. Because that's the kind of thing that happens inside the shame shell. It's isolating. You're cut off from other people because you don't want to be seen, but then you're isolated, you're disconnected inside the shame shell. And guess what happens when you're isolated and disconnected and assuming that you're bad and you're wrong because you got this thing wrong? You guessed it, the stalwart of a low confidence cycle, self-criticism. You might experience self-criticism intensely inside that shame shell. I'm wrong, I'm bad, I'm crap, I should never have done this. That self-criticism can be rife inside that shame shell. The doubt. Should I be here? Can I do this? I shouldn't be here. Oh my God, they shouldn't have given me this job. I can't do this. It's another thing that can happen inside the shame shell. Hell, another stalwart of a low confidence cycle. Self-doubt being rife and unmanaged. You may give yourself a really hard time about how you're going to be perceived. You're wrong, you're bad, and everybody's going to know. What are they going to think of you? Your clients, your boss, your team. There's another stalwart of a low confidence cycle. Excessive focus on how you're being perceived or judged. Even if, I mean, yeah, maybe in some situations you are going to be perceived and judged, but most of them not as harshly as you are in your own mind. You're probably the one that thinks worse of all. And that self-talk, that negative self-talk, that self-doubt, and all of the awful emotions that come along with that, the anxiety, the worry that erode our confidence, build when we stay inside that shame shell. The emotional consequences, think about it. I'm now thinking about when I used to retreat inside that shame shell all the time. The disconnection, the criticism, the doubt, and all the emotion that come with it. Feelings of helplessness, less self-esteem, all of that contributes to a general feeling of crapness. That is not a technical term. And interestingly, my experience of being in the shame shell, especially if I've got something wrong or if I've made a mistake, is also that it actually inhibits your ability to grow and learn from making that mistake. It's interesting, isn't it? Most people say to me, well, if I didn't, let's say, retreat inside my shame shell, I would never learn from things that I do wrong. And very often turns out that that's not the case. It's very difficult to learn constructively, let's say, from things that you've got wrong when you're inside a shame shell. Shame shell's not the place for learning. The shame shell's a place for being mauled by a bear, beaten up, doubted, criticized. It's not the place for learning. Learning takes place in a safe environment. Shame shell's not a safe environment. It's the absolute opposite. Learning takes place in an environment where we can say, okay, we messed up here. Let's have a look and see what it is we could do differently. Only when you're safe enough can you actually do that effectively, which is why so many organizations will say that their values are not about blaming and shaming and naming, but actually about being in a learning environment. Because they know full well that if everyone is jumping inside shame shells all the time, they ain't even going to be admitting to the stuff they're doing, let alone trying to learn from it. I also think that getting inside that shame shell inhibits your ability to make confident decisions and to move forward. So yeah, you may have done something wrong, you may have taken a misstep, something might not have worked out, But if you then are in a shame shell, how do you then move on from that? You've still got a job to do. You've still got a team to lead. You've still got clients that you need to service. You have to make decisions about things. You have to move forward. But very difficult to do that from inside a shame shell. Impossible, probably. Certainly impossible in a confident way. But here's the thing I think most of us don't realize. You actually don't have to get in that shame shell in the first place. You actually have a choice. You can choose to stay out of it. Now, I am not meaning to make light of this or say that there aren't really powerful unconscious drivers that might drag you in there. I don't want to do that. But I do want to say that actually you can make a decision about whether or not you want to get into a shame shell or not. Even if you can't avoid it in the moment, maybe you could just make a decision now. Is it doing you any good to climb inside that shame shell? Are you still getting something from it? And if you're not, if you're with me in what I'm saying here, and if you think, actually, do you know what? It's like being mauled by a bear in a cave that I can't get out of. It's actually not good at all. It's terrible. Then I'm going to encourage you to actually make a decision because you have a choice, right? You do not have to get inside that shame shell. And even if you've got into it, I'm going to suggest that you can make a choice to come out of it again. And in order to do that, you may have to do some work around shame. You may have to decide whether or not you think that doing something wrong, failing, making a misstep, messing up means that you are inherently wrong and bad as a person. Because that's the link that shame makes. And you may finish this episode and say, no, I do believe that to be true. Okay. But you may not. You may say, do you know what? That's a bit of a leap. It's a leap that because I made this mistake at work, I'm inherently wrong and I'm bad. Yeah, okay. I messed something up. Fine. Maybe I even need to acknowledge that and, do something to make up for it and learn from it and all the rest. But does it mean that I'm inherently wrong and bad because I didn't do this all right or I didn't do this all perfect or because I wasn't the best? I definitely don't think so. And I hope you don't either. So let's say you're with me this far and you're like, okay, the shame thing is a bit of a leap. I'm probably not wrong or bad just because I messed this thing up. If you're there with me, then you have a choice about whether or not to make it mean I'm wrong and I'm bad and I'm unworthy and I'm unlovable because I messed this up or I got it wrong. I believe very strongly that you're inherently worthy, lovable, good, even if you mess up a million times. I'm sure you're trying. I'm sure that you're not doing this shit on purpose. So how can you do something different? What could you do differently? And this is really personal. So this is really one for you. Let's say that you think, okay, that shame shell, maybe I don't have to get in that. Maybe that's not necessary for me. What could I do instead? What could you do instead? You tell me. I could share a little bit about the, decisions, awareness, insights that I got around that. I decided at some point I am not ashamed of who I am or how I am. Does that mean I always do everything right and perfectly? No, it does not. And I'm going to be okay with that. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to get stuff wrong. I'm going to mess up many times. I'm not going to make that mean that I am wrong or bad or inherently unworthy or unlovable. That shame's game and I ain't playing it. I know that I'm in a shame shell if I'm disconnected. I can be there but not be there at all. And I'll be criticizing, doubting, all that while being disconnected and metaphorically mauled by the bear. But what are your clues? What are your tells that you might have crawled inside that shame shell? Think about what it's like for you. How would you know you were in there? Would you find yourself ruminating a lot? Would you find yourself putting on a happy face when actually inside you felt terrible? Would you find yourself hiding mistakes and not wanting anybody to know? Like, what is it for you? And this is linked with lots of other things. And again, we have podcast episode on these things, but thinking about how to work with that kind of perfectionist mindset and whether you really want to do that. Thinking about failure and mistakes and how you can manage that without loads of criticism and loads of doubt stepping in. Thinking about how you could speak to yourself, decide that you're going to speak to yourself with respect rather than, metaphorically mauling yourself. From that episode about weaknesses, could you admit that you've got them and be like, yep, whoops, I did it again. Another Britney moment for me. And still be okay with who and how you are. So I get it. I get it that the shame shell can have a strong, powerful pull, but it is not inevitable. You have the ability to choose how you respond when you make a mistake or face a weakness. Confidence doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from knowing that who and how you are is okay and is good, even when things don't go as you planned. Could you make a decision today and think about whether you still really need that old shame shell? And if you don't, what could be on the other side of it? I'm going to suggest it's more confidence, but it could be all kinds of liberation for you. If you want to take this work a step further, take our free confidence assessment. It's going to tell you whether or not you're in a low confidence cycle. And if you are, it's going to give you some pointers and some ideas about how you can start to get out of it and move into a high confidence cycle. If you're ready to come and do some of that work with me, you want me as your guide, you want me as your support, there are two options for you. The Confident at Work membership is a yearly membership. That is for professional women who want to feel more confident at work. We're going for it in 2025 so that you could have your most confident year ever. I'm excited about all of the things that we're doing within the membership. Click on the link in the show notes and come and see whether it might be for you. Last, if you want private coaching with me, you can book a call and see whether we might be a good fit to work together. I'm happy to chat through your challenges, including whether or not you're in and out of that shame shell at work and the kind of impact that that might be having on your confidence. I will see you in next week's episode. Bye.
Confidence, confidence, confident. I can be confident. Confidence, confidence, confident. I can be confident at work.